let's have this conversation surrounding Cowboys #1 wide receiver CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah, man. We came into the season and a lot of people had consternation about a certain wide receiver being sold down the river because the Cowboys wanted to bet on CeeDee Lamb, a dude that they drafted in the first round and gave the 88 jersey, on being a #1 wide receiver. And we've had conversations already this season about what a dynamic, game-changing wide receiver does for a team and the ways in which they stretch defenses and those things. And I found this interesting from 538, really data-driven website that, is associated with ESPN. And they put out today the best NFL wide receivers according to ESPN Analytics. Are you seeing this as well, KG?
Yes.
And what I found interesting is that they obviously tried to make this almost Madden-like by giving a score on various things and then also compiling, every wide receiver's number of yards, the number of routes they'd run, the targets that they've gotten, and their yards per route, in addition to, like I said, like Madden, giving just a number grade for, how open receivers get, their the amount of times they catch the football, or their likelihood to make the catch, I guess is the way to say that.
Yards after catch.
And then the yards after catch. Those are things that were kind of rated here.
I'm sorry I'm laughing because I'm looking at one of them and it's just kind of absurd for one of these receivers.
Yeah, go ahead. Who is that?
So the yards after catch one. So you've got A.J. Brown, Terry McLaurin, Jamar Chase, and David Njoku, surprisingly, as far as where they are as yards after catch rank. So Njoku is tied for third with McLaurin and with Terry McLaurin. Then you have Jamar Chase at second,
who has a 70 rating.
Yeah. And then you go all the way down to the very end. Deebo Samuel is at #1, clear by 10 percentage points.
Yeah, I wonder how much that is factored, because some of his stuff is just, hey, get the ball back here in the backfield, or get the ball close to the line of scrimmage. Jimmy G, just get the ball to him and let him do the rest. And that's the type of player that he is. But ultimately, all these things together kind of give you an interesting look at who are the elite wide receivers, and I guess, game-changing wide receivers, and then maybe we could talk about #1 wide receivers, because all of these receiver ratings filter into an overall rating. And right now, that overall rating puts A.J. Brown as the best wide receiver in football at an 86, and Tyreek Hill as an 85. And those are guys that we look at and we go, definitively game-changing #1 wide receivers, right? As we continue, 84s are both Justin Jefferson and Stephon Diggs. Would you both still agree? We're in that range, right?
Yeah. I want to stop on that Tyreek Hill thing real quick.
Yeah.
Because, okay, so it's a little deceiving, I feel like, in my mind, because, yes, A.J. Brown is at 86%, or at an 86.
Yeah.
His yards after catch, though, he's at 67. Tyreek Hill is at 44. That's a little unfair because most of his stuff is coming deep down the field.
Sure.
So the rest of the yards he's got is about 10 more yards before he gets to the end zone.
Right. I mean, numbers can't capture everything of what these players are. And a lot of those are air yards, but that's because he is just running past everybody.
Right.
Like, have fun trying to keep up with that cat. He is faster than you in your dreams.
So I wanted to make sure I pointed that, because that's
Sure.
that's a little. I mean, yeah, he's not going to have the yards after catch because, like I said, most of his stuff is through the air already by the time the ball gets to him.
But with that being said, you can kind of counterbalance that by looking at his yards per route, which are higher than anybody else by a good margin.
Yep.
Like, he gets almost 4 yards every time he runs a route. That's insane. Next highest is Justin Jefferson and Stephon Diggs at 3.1. But like, I say all this to kind of start priming us at who are those wide receivers? Because the tough thing about it is we talk about people like we were talking about Dak, top 10, but like we have to actually look at it. And after those 4 guys, we get to Tyler Lockett, which I don't know if people view him as like that #1. After that, Chris Olave, Brandon Ayuk, and then we get to Jamar Chase, who I think people have a high regard for. But like, it's kind of interesting when you look at that. How far do we go with who we would typically think of as a #1 wide receiver?
Forgot to turn the mic back on.
There you go.
Like your typical profile as a #1 wide receiver.
Just, I mean, when we talk about that name recognition and the association with number one.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Stephon Diggs, DeAndre Hopkins. Those are the names that immediately come to mind.
And I think Hopkins doesn't end up being ranked here because of the time missed.
Yes, exactly.
But, like, it's kind of interesting how you get maybe like 5-7 players deep, and you're starting to look at, obviously tight ends are filtered in here too with David Njoku and Travis Kelce, but now you're getting to like Jacoby Myers, Deontay Johnson, guys who are good, don't get me wrong, but like people don't view in that way. So I do find that interesting. Like you might say, like I know Mike Bassick, I don't know if it was this week or last week, said something like, well, I mean, there's 31 or like 32 number one wide receivers, but I don't think that we view it that way, right? If you start looking at this. Now, CeeDee Lamb comes in 23rd overall with these overall ratings. What I did find interesting that CeeDee Lamb is 9th when you talk about yards per route. Does that hit you any type of way? Like, what is that? And he's around like Amon-Ra St. Brown and Devontae Adams. Like, what does that make you think of when I tell you that information?
Well, he's an improved route runner, getting more depth on his routes, being more adept at what defenses are trying to do against them, and being more subtle with his movements to allow him to create the kind of space and get the kind of depths on his routes that I think allows him to be able to be an effective wide receiver. And I think that's part of his growth as a player, is the nuances of the game. And that was one of the reasons why we loved how Amari Cooper was helping CeeDee Lamb grow and learning the nuances of the receiver position. That shows up in statistics like that when you've got to be able to win off the line of scrimmage, be able to use your hands, manipulate defenders with your feet and your eyes, and do all the kinds of things that these number one wide receivers, aside from the physical gifts, putting those things together that allow them to be those top flight wide receivers.
So with CeeDee kind of in that range where we talk about over that overall rating, he's 23rd. We've talked about yards per route. He's 9th. If you want to just talk about his getting open, he apparently is 15th on that rating scale. Like, it feels weird with CeeDee because you had a game like this past game on Sunday where he had buku yards and you saw the possibilities. And I think someone on the Twitch chat, Walker 12099, said Dak can't hit him in stride. This felt like a game where you absolutely saw Dak hit him in stride and let him go. But we saw the ups and downs in this. We saw him make great plays, but we also saw him like not sit down into spaces. That was the one thing that was very evident about that second interception with Dak Prescott. And I know that Greg Olsen immediately said it after, so everybody was able to take their cues from a NFL tight, well-regarded tight end. CeeDee Lamb is supposed to cross the face, and the reason why you know that is like I think they run Tony Pollard in motion, which identifies that it's zone, which means you need to find a place to sit down in the zone, and that was the place to sit down, it appears, and that wasn't happening. So while you see like the talent and the ability and like some of the raw things that show up, it also feels like the nuances that make those guys really dangerous and make them be able to bend defenses. I don't know if he has all of those quite yet, and I don't know when those things develop or how they do.
And that's the frustrating part about CeeDee Lamb, is that you see the flashes of what is a potential all-pro receiver, and the lack of consistency in those traits that we see from him from time to time is what is maddening. And I think you saw the height of what he is as a receiver with the plays that he was making. I mean, the move that he made on Jair Alexander for the touchdown, the second touchdown that he had, was a thing of beauty. You saw him put that right foot in the ground, plant, and be able to go. And obviously Dak hit him in stride there. But also, as you mentioned, the route where he doesn't cross the face of the defender, that's the mental mistaken aspect that sometimes is maddening with CeeDee Lamb, based on the amount of talent and skill that he possesses and how much you want to see that just become consistent week over week to where he becomes a potential top 10, top 5 wide receiver, within this offense. It's interesting because we're talking about, the depth of the route and the yards per route that he's running. John only had this statistic when it came to separation for these Cowboys receivers. Quote, the Dallas Cowboys don't have a single receiver who ranks better than the 40th percentile in separation percentage this year, with a minimum of 10% of the team's passing plays. CeeDee Lamb ranks 36th in the 36th percentile. That's the best on the team, which could be another indication on why this team would need to go after a guy like Odell Beckham Jr. So
I think, and I think to speak to that, it's that know-how, because when we talk about these guys, and again, going back to like this, we're using this overall ratings just to give us a general idea. the guys that we view as like guys that bend defenses, because there's a lot of guys in here that we think are good, but there's definitely, a difference between the guys that force defenses to react, the guys that coming into, the game planning meetings, coaches go, all right, we have to account for
that guy.
Right.
Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson, those types.
I think, do we agree that CeeDee Lamb is not that?
No, he's not that yet. He's not that dynamic game breaker, game wrecker type of receiver that no matter what, Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Stephon Diggs, you know who the football is going to, and knowing that those guys are going to make plays, and the trust that those quarterbacks have in those receivers is evident every single time the ball is going their way. We still have questions about the trust and the chemistry and the connection that Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb have at times, and we've seen that play out through the course over the last year, and it reared its ugly head against Green Bay on Sunday a little bit.
Now, that's the easy part about this, right? The harder part is, and again, I've said this a few times, the place where you're actually being judged as a team is in the playoffs. Do you think that within the last 7-8 weeks of the season that he can grow to be some level of that? Like some facsimile of that? Because we've seen from various different places that he has some of the things in him. And we've all believed that in more of like an anecdotal that he has those talents. Do we think that he can gleam on and grab some of the nuances that allow him to be a guy that, even if they it doesn't become a game breaker, but then can become and start bending the defenses? And do we see the beginnings of that in Green Bay?
I think so, because I think the true mark of any number one wide receiver is how he makes his other guys around him better. Is he threatening defenses and creating lanes and spaces for other guys to be able to eat off of what he's doing? CeeDee Lamb absolutely has the capabilities of doing it. It's a matter of putting it together week over week over week to allow defenses to feel like he is the kind of threat that will make him not only be accountable on the field when you're trying to game plan for him, but now what are the other guys doing off of him based on his production and what that means for schemes and game plans? Because for Kellen Moore, he's got to be able to dial up stuff, not just for CeeDee Lamb to be able for him to cook, but for the other guys to cook off of him.
And route combinations that make sense. Like,
exactly.
Remember, we had Kurt Warner, who is a very well-respected, obviously, quarterback who's played in this league at a very high level and a very highly respected analyst. At points, look at like what the Cowboys had been drawing up, admittedly, last season, I believe. Or no, was that earlier this season? Where he's like, what is happening here? These are bad route combinations. And I've saw with my own eyes bad route combinations in this past game. And not to say that that is the entirety of what his offense is, but I do have questions of his capabilities to help get those wide receivers open. And everything should be pulling in the same direction towards an end game or an end goal of like successful offense. And I have questions on that side of it. And then we have questions. A lot of people have questions about whether Dak Prescott has all of the wherewithal to do all those other things. And now we're adding then the question of, can CeeDee be that level of wide receiver that can help bend things as well? It's tough that you have all of those limitations pulling against.